Was there anything that surprised you that you didn't expect as you started reading the Gospels as these accounts?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think because I really assumed that if this is a wisdom book that has the smartness of Jesus all over it, like this pastor had claimed, well, I had a professor, a sociology professor in high school, and he was a Baha'i. And so he had the writings of Baha'u'llah, and he gave them to me because we had these conversations, and I was always pushing back against God, pushing even in high school. And so he knew I was like this guy who was kind of a thorn in his side. So he gave me the book, and I read it, and I was fascinated with the wisdom statements, never once thinking they were divine. But Baha'u'llah, like Confucius, or like your nearest Chinese food restaurant with fortune cookies, sometimes he would say things that just seem like, yeah, ancient wisdom. We get it. So a lot of that was just me kind of saying, okay, this makes sense, but this is probably what I'm going to see in the Gospels, right? A whole other set of Proverbs. But when I got to the Gospels and opened them up, then I realized, no, that all the red letters are not just like the Gospel of John is basically almost all red letters. Then Jesus said this, then Jesus said that. That's not what's happening in the Gospels. The canonical Gospels are actually a description of events. They're historical accounts, like, let's say, First Samuel, Second Samuel, other historical books in the Old Testament. These are historical books that are trying to make a claim about events that occurred in history. And that's all you do as a cold case detective, is you're working reports, supplemental reports that are making claims about something 30 years ago for which you have no access anymore to the eyewitnesses or the report writers. That's every cold case you're going to, well, not every, but most of the cold cases that I did, because they were like from 1972 to 1990. A lot of those folks are gone. So you have to kind of work them without being able to talk to them. And that's exactly what I did, is I just laid into the Gospels as if they were supplemental reports.
That's awesome. And that's what fascinates me. I want to camp out here for a second, just seeing how you dealt with the Gospels, the way that you did at work, just having these accounts, but maybe not access to the people who wrote them or said them to begin with. So given that in your work, you use something called forensic statement analysis. What is that, and how did you utilize that in your investigation on the Gospel accounts of these events and people?
Well, I know it sounds like it's scientific, but it really isn't. It's an art rather than a science. So it has its limits, and I'll be the first one to tell you that. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the more you spot the lie, I always say it this way. If the goal of an interview is simply to collect data, well, then that's one kind of a game we're going to play. Okay, you're going to say something, I'm going to write it down. Then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And you end up with an evaluation, which is just a collection of data given to you by the person you're interviewing. If, on the other hand, the goal of the interview is not collect the data, it's spot the lie, different game. It's an entirely different game, different skill set. Now, I'm looking for this stuff in forensic statement analysis that'll give away places of deception. And that's different. Now, I'm not writing down everything you're saying. Now I'm just listening for really how you compress time and expand time, and what kinds of pronouns are you using, what kinds of alternative words that you really don't need to use, like adjectives and adverbs. I'm looking for all the little data points that'll tell me, is he lying about this? So that's a different game. Now, the more you play that game, like any game, the better you get at it. And this is what I was doing for a living when I first walked into the church. I had been trained this way, had been to 3 courses, and had already done this on a number of homicides. And every conversation I had now was colored by my evaluation of words, even my personal. Like, I know people who do this for a living, close friends of mine, who they are no longer doing it professionally for the FBI. Instead, they are doing it for corporations, where they're just sitting and listening to the press conferences of competitors. And when the competitor says, we made this, their job is to tell the person you're working for where their competitor is lying. That's the kind of thing you end up doing all the time, right? So that's what I was doing with the Gospels. I was just applying, look, the Gospels, there's 2 kinds of evidence in criminal trials, right? There's direct evidence, which is eyewitness accounts. Anytime an eyeball can see it and then report it, that is called direct evidence. Now, in this generation, our generation, we've got cameras that can do a great job of recording. That would also be considered direct evidence. So either a live eyewitness or a video. Now, you wouldn't trust every video, would you? What if I alter the video? You wouldn't trust every speaking eyewitness either. So I don't trust direct evidence. I test direct evidence. We have a test for this. And then the jury is instructed, if it passes the test, you are to consider it reliable, even if you don't like it. Even if there's something, for example, about parts of my phone, sorry about that. Even if there's something about the actual test, the actual person you don't like. You know, I've had this happen before where you'll have people who will say, oh, this guy, he reminds me of this other guy I know who's such a liar. Well, okay, that's not a test. You want to like who he is, but you still have to consider his testimony reliable if he passes the test. That, by the way, that test can be applied to living eyewitnesses, and it can also be applied, interestingly, to video. And one of the criteria are, number one, was he really there to see what he said he saw? Similarly, was the video really shot at that time? You know, can it be corroborated in some way? Even knowing that you're not going to have another video that's going to necessarily corroborate, you just need little touch point pieces of corroboration. 3, has it been changed, altered over time? Has he changed his story? Has the video been altered? 3 or 4 rather, was there some motive, some reason why the person who shot the video and maybe altered it wanted to fool you, or the witness wanted to lie to you? He gained something in one of these areas. Well, that is typically what we apply as a test to eyewitnesses. So I knew this, and so I simply spent my time examining the gospel authors as eyewitnesses. Not that I trusted them, but I tested them. And I'll just tell you, they passed the test, except that something that always bothered me was that they include miraculous accounts. So I wrote a book called God's Crime Scene, where I really just talk about how do you get from I don't believe in God to at least believing that there's something, some form of theism, that there's a God somewhere out there. When you're a committed naturalist who believes that everything in the universe can be explained with space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, that's where I was. And after I stopped at some point with these gospels and just spent time. And when I first wrote my first book, I really thought we were going to publish God's Crime Scene first. And I pitched 3 books to the publisher, and they picked the order. So they picked Cold Case first. But I thought, in my order of thinking, I could never have gotten to the Gospels until I first knocked down my bias against God's existence. So I really had to spend time studying the nature of the universe, and that's a different book. But my point is, once I did that, I realized that if there's a being out there that could account for everything in the universe with the snap of a finger, right? Everything from nothing instantaneously. I don't mean instantaneously in the sense that I actually believe in a progressive form of creation. But if you think about it, so does the Bible. If it's 6 days or 6 epic periods, it did happen in certain steps. So I had to get to that point where I could say, yeah, I think there's really good evidence that there is a God. Now the question is Christianity the true version, the true rendition of God's existence?